Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Cash Plays. This is the March 11th episode of Cash Plays, and I'm currently recording this in my hotel room in Calgary. We're on a dinner break, and I've been doing live commentary for the Canadian Open Poker Championship, which was a $5,000 heads-up event, and it drew a lot of big-time Canadian pros. Gavin Smith was here, Yukon Brad Booth, FBT, Greg Mueller, Steve Paul Ambrose, Matt Choppy K, and others. And I am really beat down. I've done 23 hours of live-to-tape commentary in the last 2 days. It has been grueling. And we're about to do the finals in a few hours, so I was able to escape away and record another episode of Cash Plays. Adam Schwartz was supposed to do this with me, the host of the 2+2 podcast and formerly of Rounders Poker Show. But we're so burnt out that he's taking a little bit of a break. But again, I will most likely have guests on this show in the future. Just didn't happen to work out this week. Now, I got up to Canada on Wednesday and I played cash games here for a couple days. One day I played 10-20 no limit and had a pretty good score. The games up here are pretty good. There isn't a whole lot of action up here in Calgary, but apparently a lot of the players from Vancouver came over for this $5,000 heads-up event. So I was pretty happy with some of the play. I hopped into a 10-20 PLO game, and that's the biggest game that goes on in this city. And I by no means am an expert in cash game PLO, but I do play. A lot of my experience just comes from playing Omaha High-Low, just knowing about Omaha. And the game was absolutely insane. It was a 10-20 game with a $50 mandatory straddle, and everybody was short stacking it. And I hear that that's kind of the new thing to do, especially in the high level PLO games online, because what you do is you short stack and you wait for a couple people to move all in pre-flop, and you get your hand in with something like 4, 5, 6, 7, getting 3 or 4 to 1, and you have equity. A hand like that will never be more than a 3 or 4 to 1 dog against other hands, against Broadway hands, against double aces, or kings, even suited. So, and I kind of saw a lot of people doing that in this game. I mean, there was, people were buying for $2,000 or $3,000 at a time, and just shove it in. I mean, it would be $1,000 and $2,000 pots. It was the most insane game I have ever played. And I wanted to go over a PLO hand that I actually played at the bike a couple months back. And I think I butchered this hand, but it's just interesting because PLO is a game where you can make a mistake and then make up for it on a later street. So we were playing a 5-10 PLO game at the bike, and I had $4,000 effective stack, and my villain in the hand had me covered. And I was in early to mid position in a full ring game, and I limped in with Jack 10-9 with a Jack of 10 of hearts with one suit, and it got limped around 4 ways. And the tightest guy at the table raised pot out of the big blind, so that the pot was now $300. He got 3 callers, so it's 4 ways. It got limped around. Then the big blind raised it pot and got 3 callers. And I'm in there. I don't have position. I have position on the blind. And the flop came out 9-8-3 with 2 clubs, 9 of clubs, 8 of spades, and 3 of clubs. So I've got an open-ended straight draw. It's really not a great hand in the sense. I also have top pair with a 9, but it's not a great hand in the sense because there's 2 suits out there. I'm going to have to catch my open-ended straight card that is offsuit. A club I can't really continue on. But the guy bet pot. He bet 300. One guy folded in front of me. I called, and a guy behind me called. So the pot was 1,200. I've got top pair with an open-ended straight draw to the nuts. Again, I don't have a club flush draw. Pot's 1,200. Turn now is the queen of spades. So now I have the nuts. But it brings a second flush draw out there. Again, there are 2 clubs on the flop. Now 2 spades on the turn. And the board is 9-8-3 queen. And now, again, the tightest guy on the table, who usually shuts down, doesn't put any money in the board, in the hand unless he has the nuts, he bets pot again. Now, this is a spot here where if people are trying to, figure out, where the mistakes are made in PLO, The more and more I think about this hand, the more and more I need to fold here. I've got a guy behind me, and I'm 95% sure that this guy has Jack 10 as well out of the blind. Yeah, there might be a possibility that he has 3 queens, but, there's a very, very good chance that when he's raising out of the blind, he's doing it with something like an ace-ace, Jack 10, something like that. Jack 10 certainly in his range, even though I have 2 of the jacks. But he's going to be scared of the queen if he just has ace-ace, because it logically completes an open-ended straight draw on that board. On a 9-8-3 board, the queen comes. Well, Jack 10's there. This isn't Hold'em, it's Omaha. Usually the nuts are out there. So when he bets pot, I am almost certain that he has Jack 10 along with me. Here's my problem. I've got 2 suits. I've got clubs out there and spades out there. The key to PLO is the redraw, and I have no redraw. He could have Jack 10 with a club draw, with a spade draw, or with a set, totally free-rolling me to fill up. Now, I really think I should have dumped the hand here, and what I ended up doing was probably the worst thing. I called. And the reason why I called was because I wanted to see what the guy behind me was going to do. And I know I'm not pricing him out of a flush draw. But, I was scared. And again, I'm not an expert in PLO, and I just didn't have the balls to fold the hand. So I ended up calling. And luckily for me, the guy behind me folded. And again, I am almost positive that this guy has Jack 10 along with me. But what I was thinking was that if a scare card came on the river, like a club, like a backdoor spade, or the board pairing, I could get him off of the same hand, off of Jack 10. The guy behind me folded, and that's exactly what happened. The river paired to 3, so the board read 9-8-3, queen 3. He now checked to me, and I bet pot, which was $2,400. Let's see, the pot was $300, and then he bet pot $1,200. Actually, the pot was $3,600, and I basically shoved the rest of my chips in, or whatever I had left, or I bet pot for $3,600, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and I actually had $2,500. I'm looking at my notes here, and he folded Jack 10 face up, and I ended up taking down the pot, getting him off of the same hand. And it's just a little example of how kind of PLO can be fun, where you can represent certain cards. Or sometimes if you're heads up, you don't necessarily need to raise with a nut hand, because if you're pretty sure that someone else also has the nut hand, you can use scare cards to get them off of the hand. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that I played this hand right. In fact, calling might have been the worst option with a guy behind me with 2 flush draws out there, and I probably should have folded the turn, which is an interesting thing in PLO, if I'm positive the guy has the nuts and it's just a total free roll against me. But I was able to use a scare card and steal the pot away. I've got a lot of emails moving along to another topic about iTunes, when this show is going to be up on iTunes. And I just can tell you that it's being worked on right now, and that the show will be up soon on iTunes, hopefully within a week. So, hopefully we will see this up on iTunes. I wanted to go over a no-limit hand that I played here, and I was playing a 5-10 no-limit game in Calgary. This was a couple of days ago. And I started the hand with $1,100. I didn't bring a whole lot of money up with me in Canada. I didn't want to deal with the exchange, and they didn't do a money buyback. And I had started with $2,000, and I was down to $1,100. And I had an extremely tight image. And it got limped around to me in the big blind, and I had 2 kings. And I raised it to 100, and I got 4-way action. So the pot was 415, and I had $1,000 in front of me. The board came out king 7 deuce rainbow. Now here's the question. What do I do here? Do I make a weak lead into 4 people, or do I check? I mean, I flopped the nuts. There's no real draws here. What do I do? Now, if the board did not come out king deuce 7, if it had come out any 2 other cards, and this is something that I've talked about in the past, with any type of draw, because I have basically 2 times the pot size here, I pretty much need to shove on any non-ace flop board. If the board comes out like a 9-6-5 with a couple hearts, I need to shove. We've talked about this many times. I can't make a bet where if somebody calls me, I'm not going to pay off a draw on a later street. So I need to cut out all the implied odds, and anytime you have sometimes 2, even 3 times the pot size in your stack, 3 times is a little big, but I think usually 2 times the pot size, and you want to get somebody off of a draw, you need to shove. Because of the fact, if you only bet pot and the guy calls and he makes his draw, he's now going to bet into you, and it's going to be very difficult for you to lay down your hand. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to basically shove on any non-ace board. If the board comes out like 7 deuce deuce, maybe I don't bet that much because I want some action from somebody. But in this case, with the king 7 deuce board, I decided to make a weak lead. I wanted somebody to think that maybe I had pocket queens and maybe they would come over the top of me. Also, if somebody else flopped the case king, if I checked that board and then came out strong on subsequent streets, I don't know if I get all the money in from king jack. If I check that board and a guy with king jack bets and I now check raise or call and then lead the turn or do something towards the end, I don't know if I get all the money in because I'm showing extreme strength. So I actually make a weak lead here. I bet 200 and I get a guy to come over the top of me. And he ended up having king 10. Everybody else folded, and of course I took it down with 3 kings. But again, I think the weak lead actually induced a move, even though the guy had the case king there. If I check that board and he bets and I do something strange, I don't think a good player really commits themselves with king 10. I think they get away from it. There's really nothing you can beat. So, my style is normally to play my hands fast, and I usually think that's the way to get the most money in. Now, when you're short stacked a little bit, I understand the difference. But in this case, I decided to make the weak lead, and, I got paid off to the maximum. Which brought me, I started thinking about this after this hand, and it's the issue of should you wait one street to put money in capped games? And, if you raise the flop, is there a chance of a fold, say, when you flop a set, or do you wait till the guy pot commits himself on the turn if there's a draw out there? And there's 2 schools of thought here. Say the board is 7 deuce 3 with 2 hearts, and you flop a set of 8s. And you're playing at the 5-10 game at Commerce with a 400 cap, or you're playing in a 5-5 game with a 500 cap, or any game with a cap. And you are almost positive that the guy has an overpair. And he makes a pretty hefty bet on the flop. Well, do you raise there and get the money in, or do you wait and have the guy pot commit himself on the turn? I am, come from the school of thought where I don't want action killers to come on the turn. We have an email about that, and I'll get to that later on in the show. And normally I will raise. But if you're against a good player, and let's say his hand is pocket jacks, and, the board comes out, let's say 10-9 deuce or something like that, and he throws a bet out, and now you raise him. A good player, even in a capped game, might get away from that overpair. But if it's draw heavy and you wait and you call, and now the turn comes a non-scary card, he is basically going to have to pot commit himself. So you really, really have to, analyze the situation, analyze the player, and analyze the amount of scare cards that come that can kill your hand. You really have to put your guy on a range of hands as well. Sometimes if you're up against an aggressive player and you think, hey, there's a chance that this guy just has ace-king, and if I call here and he hits an ace or a king, I can get the rest of the money in. Now, in deeper stack games, I really don't like that because I think you need to start building a pot right away, and unless the guy is really bad, he's not going to commit when you show turn strength when he bet with ace-king and missed and now catches an ace or a king, and now all of a sudden you're showing turn strength. But in a capped game, if a guy makes a continuation bet with ace-king on a 9-6-3 board with 2 hearts and you flopped a set of 9s and you just call, and now the turn is an offsuit king or an ace, now he'll shove, whereas maybe he would have shut down. So you really have to analyze the type of situation and analyze all the elements to the hand. Again, I am more of a player that will fast play hands, especially in deeper stack games. But you don't have to take the same line in every single situation. So there is a different way to play a monster in a capped game if you're up against a guy that will put a lot of chips in to try to protect against a draw. Well, stick around because we're going to get into some of your email questions and discuss more cash game strategy right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays.
Got questions about your poker game? Saving for someone who cares like Poker Road Radio. Tune in every Sunday night to PokerRoad.com during the guaranteed online documents as Bob and Huff break down the hot topics in poker, interview the biggest names on tour about everything except strategy, and take your calls live. Heard of the 50-50 rule? You ain't heard nothing yet. Want to know if a pro's busto? Well, they probably are. But call and ask anyway. Maybe we'll get someone to call in and confirm it live. It's a poker forum over the airwaves. Come flame away on the Lord's Day. Big Poker Sundays with Huff and Bob. Sundays at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern on PokerRoad.com.
Cash Plays.
And we're back with Cash Plays. And before I want to get into this week's emails, and of course you can email us at cashplays@pokerroad.com, cashplays@pokerroad.com, I want to talk about one more topic, and I've gotten a number of emails with people wanting to know about bankroll requirements. Can I go over some things about bankroll? And I'm going to touch on it here and probably get into it a little more in depth in future shows. In No Limit Hold'em, I really am of the school of thought that if you are going to play in a game full-time as a professional, you should have some money saved up for expenses. First off, for your monthly expenses. So, let's say it costs you $2,000 or $3,000 a month to live. You really should save about you should have about 5 or 6 months worth of expenses saved up, so that's about $18,000. That doesn't even count towards your bankroll. Once you have that money aside, then I like to think of 20 to 30 buy-ins in whatever game you're playing to be a good bankroll. Now, if you're not playing as a professional, but you want to play in this, kind of on the side as a part-time to make some money and you take it seriously, your buy-in requirement might be a little bit less because you can always replenish your bankroll. But if you were playing poker as a sole means of your income, of your life, you really need to be conservative with your bankroll. And I would say 6 months worth of living expenses plus 30 buy-ins of whatever you buy in is a good bankroll. Now, when you start buying into deeper games, you don't quite need 20 or 30 buy-ins. What I mean by that is, like, if I'm playing in a 10-20 game and I'm buying in for $5,000 or $6,000, well, I might not need 30 buy-ins of that full amount because it's very rare that you're ever getting stacked. You can always lose that money, but especially in a capped games where most of these questions are coming from, in capped games, I would seriously suggest a minimum of 20 to 30 buy-ins. If you're buying in for a $500 capped game, that's $15,000 plus 6 months worth of expenses. Normally that amount will allow you to, properly, wade through some of the variance that can come in the game. And again, as you buy in deeper in uncapped games, you don't need full buy-ins, because the risk of ruin or the risk of loss of your stack goes down so much as you buy in so much deeper in comparison to the big blind, which is one of the things that isn't necessarily addressed in print properly. I don't think that when you buy in deeper, you need less overall in terms of buy-ins. But in capped games, which is usually what people are talking about, again, 30 buy-ins of capped games, 6 months worth of expenses. Now, I want to get into some emails here from this week. And the first email comes from Denmark, and I've received this email from like 7 different people. I'm going to read this from Jonas from Copenhagen, but Robert Ritchie, Steve in Las Vegas, Andy, Rob Warnack, Brian Carpenter, they've all asked the same question. And Jonas says, I have a cash game question that I'd love for you to address. It's not about strategy, but about the beatability of low-stake, live, no-limit hold'em cash games. I'm a recreational but dedicated poker player. One of the things I've been looking forward to when I'm traveling around the U.S. this summer is playing some live cash games in Las Vegas. So I was a bit disheartened when I heard you say, passing on Poker Road Radio, that 1-2 no-limit games in Vegas aren't profitable because of the large rake. I'd love for you to expand on that. And a lot of people have emailed and said, can you beat a 1-2 game? Can you beat a 3-5 no-limit game? And the problem with those games, and I'll give you an example of one that I'm most familiar with at the bike, which is the 200 max game. The blinds are 3 and 5, and I believe they take a $5 rake and $1 jackpot drop. Now, I know in other places they take a percentage up to a certain amount with a max of $5, but I know the way that they do it in Los Angeles, and this is what I'm going to address, is it's a flat $5 no matter how big the pot is, with a $1 bad beat jackpot drop. Now, if you don't see a flop, it's $1. So we're talking about taking $6 per hand off of every single pot, basically, that sees a flop. Now, if you're seeing 30 hands an hour, that's $180 per hour that the house is taking down. You start off with a $200 max stack. After 10, 11 hours, the entire player's money that's been put on the table in the beginning of the session is gone, down in the drop box. I have seen some people, and then at a 2-3 game with a $100 max, the rake might only be $3 or $4 with $1 for the bad beat jackpot. It's the same concept. $5 a hand, $150 an hour. Players only start with 9 times 100, $900. I've seen one guy came up to me at the bike and showed me a spreadsheet how he beat the $100 game for about $12 or $13 by staying away from small pots and playing extremely tight. And, that's a strategy that might work. But if you're trying to assess the beatability of a low-level, no-limit game, and it's really unfortunate these days, because I think a lot of them aren't beatable, even if they are really good games. You've got to look at the rake structure, figure out how many hands are played per hour, and and figure out if you can overcome, the structure of what the house takes. And in the bikes case, I think the first game that you probably can beat is a 5-5 no limit game with a $500 max. I mean, I know this guy showed me that he could beat the 100 game, but I just find it very, very difficult. In Vegas, the low-level no-limit games at some of the places are uncapped, so you can take into account that if you can cover certain people, then you might be able to show profitability over the long term. There are other places that take, an hourly collection. If you're playing a 1-2 no-limit game with a max $200 buy-in and they're taking $6 per half hour, well, that's $12 an hour per person. That's a lot better than if you're playing in a game that takes $5 per hand, because you're going to win on average 3 to 4 hands per hour, and that's $15 to $20. And again, it's unfortunate because the games online are very, very tough. You don't have to tip online. That's the other thing, too, when you're playing live. Add another $1 per hand for $1 for tip for the dealer. So, it might be $6 or $7 per pot. So try to figure out how many pots you would win per hour. Again, I think it's an average of 3 or 4. To figure out if you can actually beat the game overall. Now, when you're playing at that level, you don't necessarily have to beat the game. You can just be learning. But I find it very, very difficult to keep a steady income. And even if you were to be able to beat a game for $15, $20 an hour, well, you have to live. I don't see how anyone would really be able to build a bankroll up making $20 an hour in poker. I think you need to start making $30, $40, $50 an hour where you can pay for your living expenses and save if you have good habits. So that's what I mean by beating the game. Not necessarily just a positive number, but a number where you can actually save money. And I find it very difficult with a flat rake system in Los Angeles to do that. So I hope that answers your question, Jonas and everybody else. Email here from Lauren Finkelstein. He writes, is it ever correct to fold the nuts in Hold'em? I flopped a joint with Jack 10 on a King of Diamonds, Queen of Diamonds, 9 of Clubs board. Guy led into me for 75. I made it 300, and he pushed for 1,500. I obviously insta-called. But he was free-rolling with Jack 10 of Diamonds. When would you ever get away from a hand like this? Well, thank you for the email, Lauren. And I don't think that this is the type of situation where you would ever get away from Jack 10. But you do have to be wary, and I'll give you an example, and I actually saw it go down at the Commerce in the 10-20 game a couple of weeks ago. If you have made a one-card straight, and it's normally a Broadway straight because the nut is the nut. Let's say the board is 10 Jack, King Ace. So anybody with a queen has a straight. And there is a 2 flush out there, and somebody leads into you, let's say on the turn. I'd be very hesitant to raise in certain situations when you're deep. And this is exactly what this guy did. A guy led into a Jack 10 King Ace board, and there were 2 diamonds out there. He led into the pot for about 150. A guy in the button made it 500. Well, obviously he had a straight, he had a queen. The guy from up front then re-raised all in for 7,000. And the guy snap called on the button with a queen. Well, guess what? The guy from up front had queen 8 of diamonds, and he hit the queen on the river. A flush draw free roll. So, again, those are the situations where I fold the nuts and hold them. Normally when they're one-liner straights to a high straight, which is a one-card nut, when you don't have a flush draw. And sometimes there can be 2 flush draws out there. Remember, 4 cards, you can have 2 flush draws on either side, and, maybe one guy bets, another guy raises, you call, and then another guy over-shoves all in, and this guy calls all in. You really need to muck the hand. You never want to get into a spot where you have the nuts, but someone can possibly free roll against you, which is, again, more of a common thing in Omaha. And the only real times that you need to be concerned with it and hold them are one-card Broadway straights. Whenever you flop the nuts with a 2-card hand, like a King, Queen, 9 board in Hold'em, I don't see you really ever getting away from it unless it's a situation where, you're ridiculously deep, and I'm talking about, 500 to 1,000 big blinds deep, and, something like that happens where, the pot's limped around and a guy bets, you raise with the nuts, and now all of a sudden, say I'm there in the 10-20 game with 8,000, and, it's limped around, and King, Queen, 9, guy bets 50, I make it 350, and now the guy shoves for 8,000. And I know the guy is not a maniac, and, he's a decent player. Well, then that's a spot where, I might end up folding. But again, for the purposes of our show, where most people play in cap games and don't play ridiculously deep, the only times you really need to concern yourself with folding the nuts and hold them and being concerned and sometimes not raising with the nuts, again, are one-card straights. One-card straights to the high end, again, where you're not using 2 cards for the nut straight, but just one card for the straight with flush draws out there. And again, you want to be wary, and the reason why I'm saying high straights is because anytime there's a low straight out there, somebody else could have the nut straight. If the board is 3, 4, 5, 6, and you have 7, 8, but there's a flush draw out there, well, I'm not going to go anywhere because some idiot might think he's going to put all his money in there with just a 7. But again, if the board is Jack 10 Queen King, and I have an ace, and there's a flush draw out there, and all of a sudden this pot gets ridiculously big for no apparent reason, be wary of the flush draw. I hope that answers your question, Laurel Finkelstein. Next question comes from Matt in Phoenix, Arizona. He says, my question is, how do you play big pairs, queens or higher, in early position? In your experience, is there more money to be made by limping or just making the standard pre-flop raise? I know this can be table or player dependent, but generally, what do you do and what do you like better? I actually fell into a trap over the last year of limping in a lot with big pairs from early position. And the more and more I did it, the more and more I became less of a fan of it. I just think it opens, it just polarizes your range so much in a live game. Because if you're not going to limp re-raise with some light hands like suited connectors and not aces or kings, then you're basically playing your hand face up. So that if you limp in with aces, and even for capped games, once you get deep, you limp in with aces, and maybe a guy raises with queen jack suited. Let's say you're playing a 5-5 game and a guy raises to 40. Now all of a sudden, you make it 200. And he is deep enough, and you're playing in a very, very deep game. That might not be the best example because that's a big raise, but say he raises to 20 and you raise to 100. And he's got, 2,000. And he had a suited connector. He knows that you've got aces or kings. So you're playing your hand totally face up. The deeper that you play, especially in live games, as more internet players migrate to these live games, I think that the best way to get money into the pot pre-flop with aces or kings is to raise and just hope to get 3-bet. That's what I would do. especially if you're raising with other hands besides aces or kings, sometimes from up front, they don't specifically know you have aces or kings. So again, the two main reasons for not limp re-raising in deeper games is that making a raise will get more money into the pot if you get 3-bet, and you are playing your hand basically face up if you're not going to mix up the limp re-raise. And I don't like playing my hand face up out of position against halfway decent players. Now, if you're playing in a capped game, like a 200 game, and you've got an aggressive guy, in late position that, might raise from the cutoff or button every time, and you're playing, somewhat short, then by all means, you've just got to figure out the best way to get the money in the pot. Say you're playing in a game where you've got $150 in a $200 cap game, and you can limp for $5, and this maniac's making it 35 every time on the button. Well, you can limp re-raise him there. Fine, especially if he's crazy enough to call with an inferior hand. But as you migrate to deeper games, I think it's a bad habit to get into. I think you should most likely play your hand straightforward and raise. And I see a lot of people sometimes falling into the trap where they'll limp in from late position with big hands. Now that's a kind of a sophisticated play if you have aggressive players in the blind, because if you limp in with kings or aces from late position, they can never put you on that hand. But I again think that there's more value if you've got aggressive players to your left or in the blinds to just opening from late position, because they give you far, far less credit for just opening than a limp re-raise. So if you open, you can easily get re-raised light, and now whether you're in position, you might just call with aces or make another 3-bet or re-raise an aggressive guy to your left. So keep that in mind, that with the aggression factor going up in live games and on the internet, that opening with the intention of getting re-raised, I think, is the best line to take with your big pairs. I hope that helps you, David from the United Kingdom. Last email of the day here is going to come from David Johnson. And he says, should I gamble with ace-king as a re-raise push preflop in cap games to increase my stack size when I know that I have little fold equity versus my opponent? And that's a very, very interesting question, David. And when I read that email, it made me think of something I read, and I think it was written by Gigabot, Daryl Dinkin, regarding tournament play. And what he basically said was that if you are at a very, very good very good table in a tournament, that sometimes you want to slightly take the worst of it in an all-in situation, because the chips that you might gain by winning that situation will be so much more valuable than passing up on that situation. And the same thing can be applied, I think, to capped no-limit games. And I'll give you an example. Say you're in the 5-10, 400 cap game at Commerce. It's a ridiculously capped game, 40 big blinds. And there are donkeys with extremely deep stacks. I do not have a problem gambling it up early to increase your stack. I don't have a problem if the guy is going to show me that he's got 2 jacks or 2 queens. I will take maybe a 4 or 5% disadvantage, because the extra money that I might make from winning that pot, winning that race, will be more valuable against those deeper stacks. Remember, in a capped game, it's kind of a rush to build your stack, specifically in ridiculously restricted games like a 5-10, 400 game. So I think the answer to your question is with a hand like ace-king, I like a re-raise push, even if you don't think there's that much fold equity. Because unless the guy has aces or kings, you're not going to be that far behind. The times that there is fold equity, obviously you're going to pick up that dead money. And in cap games, you're not dealing with the most advanced players, so there are going to be times where you dominate an ace-queen or an ace-jack. So overall, I like your thinking, David. And I don't mind picking hands. You might pick a hand you might limp re-raise with a hand like a pocket 9 or pocket 9s or pocket 10s. Just as long as you don't gamble it up too much where you're taking too much of the worst of it. You never want to get into a situation where, you get a raise and a re-raise in front of you, and now you look down at pocket 10s and you think to yourself, well, half the time I'm racing, half the time the guy's got he's got a overpair. I'm going to gamble here because I want to increase my chip stack so that I can play deep, with some, weak players at the table. Well, that's really a recipe for disaster because, you're taking far too much of the worst of it. You're hoping for a coin flip. 50% of the time, you're going to be 4-1 dog. The other 50% of the time, it's going to be a coin flip. So don't take this to an extent too far. But I don't mind early gambling in cap games because those extra chips have extra value, especially if you're comfortable playing in a deeper game. So I hope that answers your question, David Johnson. And I am going to have to go because we're going to be filming the finals of the Canadian Open Poker Championship. And Huck Seed is playing in the second semifinal right now. And Brad Booth has already made the finals, so by the time you guys listen to this, you'll know the result. It's actually going to be on Score in Canada, so for any Canadians listening, in the next few months, you can check out Score, the Score Sports Network, and that's where you will find this heads-up program. I want to thank everybody for listening, and again, you can email me at cashplays@pokerroad.com. Again, cashplays@pokerroad.com. And I have access to voicemails. Did get a couple of voicemails this week. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to play them because I'm from a remote location. But leave a message at 877-836-7623, 877-836-ROAD. And I am Bart Hanson. I will see you next week.